Hello. Everyone knows the Beatles, right? John, Paul, George and Ringo. But do you know how many Beatles there were before they were famous and how they got started? Most people only remember the Fab Four, but there were others in the early days. This is the story of the Beatles, right from the very beginning, the few years before they hit the big time, before the Beatles became the most successful group in history. There were other members of the group for a short time. This is their story.
The beginning. John Lennon formed a skiffle group in 1957 with friends from Quarrymen High School in Liverpool. For anyone whose memory is not so good or has no idea what skiffle was, basically it was people who got together to make music with improvised and homemade instruments. In the UK in the 1950s, the country was finally recovering from war and shortages, and skiffle offered entertainment without having any money. The truth is that without skiffle, modern music would probably not have evolved at all for a very long time. Virtually every skiffle group had a bass made from a tea chest, a broom handle and a washboard to replace a drum kit. The Quarrymen. The group was originally called the Blackjacks, but was quickly changed to the Quarrymen. The Quarrymen were performing at a church garden party. John Lennon was performing a song called Come Go With Me, and he obviously didn't know the lyrics, and he was making them up as he went along. A guy called Paul McCartney was in the crowd and was watching, and he knew the words were wrong, but he was impressed with Lennon's ingenuity. So McCartney cornered Lennon after the set and they started talking. They both had a passion for music, so they got on well together. Paul performed Eddie Cochran's 20 Flight Rock, and Lennon was very impressed, mainly because Paul actually knew all the words. So from that chance meeting, the two joined forces and it was the beginning of a legend. George Harrison was a long-term friend of Paul. He joined the group a year later in 1958. George joined despite John Lennon's reservation about his age, as he was only 15. George was born in 1943.
Before changing the name to the Beatles in 1960, there were several other members of the group. In January 1959, the Quarrymen consisted of John Lennon, Paul McCartney and George Harrison.
There were other members of the band prior to the three. Colin Hanton was a drummer who was born in 1938. John Lowe was a pianist who was born in 1932. Colin Hanton quit the group at the end of 1958 after disagreement with the other band members. John Lowe quit the Quarrymen to join another band. His friends joked later he left the Beatles to join an unknown band. Star Search was a talent show organised by ABC TV and talent scout Carol Levi's. In the autumn of 1958, the group had a chance to audition for Star Search again, nearly a year and a half after the Quarrymen's first audition. For this audition, the group changed their name to Johnny and the Moondogs. Lennon was without a guitar, his having just broken. Johnny and the Moondogs passed the first heat of the competition in Liverpool and were invited to appear in the finals in Manchester. The group performed Buddy Holly's Think It Over to a positive reaction, but were unable to stay until the end of the competition to receive the results. As they were leaving, Lennon saw a cutaway electric guitar by the stage door. He picked it up and walked off with it, later saying, well, the trip wasn't a total loss.
Following their Star Search audition, Johnny and the Moondogs changed their name to Japage 3, combining letters from each of the members' names, John, Paul and George, and a number 3. Despite hiring a manager, bookings dried up completely. By May, Japage 3 was defunct, but the three continued to see each other socially, and Lennon and McCartney continued to write songs together. Introducing Mona Best. A lady called Mona married Johnny Best after her first husband was killed in World War II. She had a son, Peter, by her first marriage in 1941. They lived in India. She moved to Liverpool in 1945, finally settling in a large Victorian house in 1957. The Best family claimed that Mona then pawned all her jewellery and placed it on a bet on Never Say Die, a horse that was ridden by Lester Piggott in the 1954 Epsom Derby, which won at 33 to 1, using her winnings to buy the house in 1957. Pete Best, Beatle number 5. Born Randolph Peter Scanlon in Madras, British India in 1941. However, his father lost his life during the war. His mother married John Best in 1944. Pete took the surname of his adoptive father.
The Two Eyes Coffee Bar. After watching a television report about the Two Eyes Coffee Bar in London Soho, where several singers had been discovered, Mona Best came up with the idea of having her own club in Liverpool. The Two Eyes Coffee Bar was a coffee house at 59 Old Compton Street in Soho, London. It was open from 1956 to 1970. It played a formative role in the emergence of Britain's skiffle and rock and roll music culture of the late 1950s. And several major stars, including Tommy Steele and Cliff Richard, were first discovered performing there. The coffee bar allowed standing room only for about 20 people and had a serving counter with an espresso coffee machine, an orange juice dispenser and a sandwich display case. The Casbah Coffee Club. Mona's house was 8 Hayman's Green, Liverpool, and is today still open as a tourist attraction. She turned the basement into a club and called it the Casbah Coffee Club. When it was being prepared, the future Beatles picked up paintbrushes to decorate to make sure that the club was opened on time. In addition to the 4 boys' artistic contributions, Cynthia Powell, later to become Cynthia Lennon, painted a silhouette of John on the wall, which can still be seen today. It's a misconception that the Beatles started at the now world-famous Cavern Club in Liverpool. Their start owes it all to Mona's Casbah Coffee Club. The Cavern came much later. Opening night, 29th of August 1959. The opening of the Casbah Coffee Club was really the birth of the Mersey sound, which spawned many famous artists in the 1960s. Mona booked the Les Stewart Quartet to play the opening night with George Harrison on guitar, but they cancelled the booking after Stewart and Ken Brown, a member of the group, had a quarrel. Stewart was angry that Brown had missed a rehearsal because Brown was helping Mona decorate the club. 300 membership cards had already been sold, so it had to open. Harrison said he had 2 friends in a band called the Quarrymen who would play instead. This is the stage where John Lennon and Paul McCartney first played at the Casbah Coffee Club. Today it's a tourist attraction in Liverpool. Ken Brown was born in 1940. He only played at the Casbah with the Quarrymen for a few weeks when he broke his leg. He couldn't perform, so an argument over money followed, and Ken Brown left the group permanently. The Quarrymen were paid the grand sum of 15 shillings for their performance. Today, that amount is about $1, but in real purchasing terms is about $25. The Quarrymen played 7 Saturday engagements at the Casbah from the 29th of August 1959 to the 10th of October 1959. Mona charged 1 shilling entrance fee on a Saturday night, as well as an annual membership of 2 shillings and sixpence, half a crown, approximately 15 US cents. As there was no amplification, John Lennon later persuaded Mona to hire a young amateur guitar player called Harry to play a short set before the Quarrymen, but this was only so they could use his 40-watt amplifier. There were queues for the Quarrymen. Hundreds queued at Mona's club on a Saturday night to watch Lennon, McCartney and Harrison perform. But the row about money with Ken Brown and Mona caused the trio to storm out and not perform on the 10th of October 1959. The club went on to host many more future big stars from Liverpool, including Cilla Black and Jerry and the Pacemakers. Best was studying at the Collegiate Grammar School when he decided he wanted to be in a music group. So Mona bought him a drum kit from Blackler's music store and Best formed his own band, the Blackjacks. After John, Paul and George had left the Casbah Coffee Club, they were short of engagements. They went back to the Casbah and saw Pete Best play with the Blackjacks, but the Blackjacks had decided to break up. Following the departure of Brown, Lennon convinced fellow art school student Stuart Sutcliffe to purchase a bass guitar and join the group. The group had no bookings, but began rehearsing vigorously to allow the musical novice Sutcliffe to practice his new instrument. Sadly, Stuart's place in the band was very short-lived, as he died of a brain hemorrhage in 1962. In early 1960, the Quarrymen returned to Philips Sound recording services to record Lennon's new original song, After 909. Sadly, this recording did not survive. Around the same time, the three made a rehearsal tape at McCartney's home. Harrison was absent as he had an apprenticeship, and the tape features several jams and original songs, including Paul McCartney's instrumental, Cayenne. The name change in 1960. The four disliked the name Quarrymen, and went through several others during this period, including Los Paranoias. By March 1960, Lennon and Sutcliffe came up with a new name, the Beatles, although for a short time they played as the Silver Beatles. No one had a clue at this time just how big these four guys from Liverpool would become, or that they would change the world of music forever.
George Harrison put it this way: "We had a string of drummers coming through. After about 3 of these guys, we ended up with almost a full kit of drums from the bits they'd left behind. So Paul decided he'd be the drummer. He was quite good at it. At least he seemed okay. Probably we were all pretty crap at that point. It only lasted for 1 gig, but I remember it very well. It was in Upper Parliament Street in London, where a guy called Lord Woodbine owned a strip club. It was in the afternoon, with a few perverts, 5 or so men in overcoats, and a local stripper. We were brought on as the band to accompany the stripper. Paul on drums, John and me on guitar, and Stu on bass." The Beatles drummer problem. How many drummers do you think the Beatles went through to arrive at Ringo Starr? According to some sources, the number is 18, but this includes guests. After Colin Hanton quit the Quarrymen in the summer of 1958, John, Paul and George didn't play with a drummer again until May 1960. In 1960 there was chaos in the band. They played with 9 different drummers, many of them just the once. Tommy Moore was their first drummer, even though he turned up late for their debut performance at an audition with a famous producer called Larry Parnes. So a drummer called Johnny Hutchinson sat in with them until Tommy turned up. Hutchinson was later to turn down playing permanently with the Beatles. After their Scottish tour backing a singer called Johnny Gentle, Moore was so fed up with John Lennon that he quit the group. Despite many desperate pleas, he refused to play with them ever again. The band soon discovered a new drummer called Norman Chapman, who had just joined, settled in well with John, Paul and George and Stuart. He should have gone to Hamburg with the Beatles. However, his luck was to run out too, because a week before departing for Hamburg, he was called up for national service and joined the army for the next 2 years. Crisis time again. Then Pete Best again. On the 12th of August 1960, the Beatles hired Pete Best at Liverpool's Jacaranda Club, which was owned by their manager at the time, Alan Williams. He was not exactly their first choice, but he was available, and the Beatles needed a 5-piece with a drummer for a gig in Hamburg. But there was a side benefit to having Best in the group. He was a very good-looking guy, McCartney said, and out of all the people in our group, the girls used to go for Pete. Pete's reputation preceded him. He was known around Liverpool as mean, moody and magnificent. Next, Bruno Koschmider. Bruno Koschmider, a German promoter, wanted to hire the Beatles for his own club, the Kaiserkeller in Hamburg, and they were there for a couple of months. He must have really liked them, because he then got in touch with Alan Williams and said, "We want another Liverpool band to play in another club at the Indra." Now a complete group. For the first time in 2 years, the Beatles had a permanent drummer, one who would stay with them for the next 2 years. They gained a fantastic reputation, made a recording in Hamburg, acquired a manager in Brian Epstein, and signed a record deal with Parlophone. Kaiserkeller, Hamburg and Ringo. While they were in Hamburg for the first time, the Beatles started hanging around with other musicians from Liverpool, especially those from Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, including Hurricanes drummer Ringo Starr. Their lives would take very different paths over the next 2 years until they would release a record together again. The Hurricanes and the recording. On October the 15th, 1960, the Hurricanes decided to make a record, so he asked his drummer, Ringo, and 3 friends from the Beatles, John, Paul and George, to join them. So for the first time, John, Paul, George and Ringo appeared on a record together. Brian Epstein. By this time the Beatles were breaking through. They had a record deal, they had a manager, a very shrewd man called Brian Epstein. Epstein knew how to manage. He made them get rid of the scruffy look. He made them wear identical suits and haircuts and presented an image as well as a sound. He got a record deal with EMI, at that time a giant in the music industry. George Martin from EMI. The Beatles auditioned for George Martin on the 6th of June 1962 at the Abbey Road Studios. The EMI sound engineer did not like Pete Best's drumming, so he was fired on the 16th of August 1962, which was cold and harsh with no notice. Pete was replaced by Ringo Starr on the same day. There were a few who turned down the chance to be the Beatles drummer before Ringo joined. Bobby Graham, a drummer, turned down the opportunity in July 1962. Richie Galvin turned down the job as he did not like Lennon's sarcasm. Johnny Hutchinson said his group, the Big Three, made a better sound, and he recommended Ringo Starr. And finally, Ringo Starr. Ringo arrived with the Beatles on the 16th of August 1962. The group was then complete. So what happened to everyone involved? John Lennon was assassinated in New York on December the 8th, 1980. His murderer, Mark Chapman, is still in Wendick Correctional Facility in Alden, New York, serving a life sentence. At the time of writing, Chapman has been turned down for parole 10 times. George Harrison died of cancer on November the 29th, 2001. Paul McCartney is alive and well, aged 77. Ringo Starr is also alive and well, aged 79. John Lowe, alive and well, aged 77. George Martin died aged 90 on the 8th of March 2018. The cause is undisclosed. Many say that George Martin made the Beatles. Stuart Sutcliffe died of a cerebral hemorrhage on the 10th of April 1962. Brian Epstein died on the 27th of August 1967 from an accidental drug overdose. Ken Brown died from emphysema on the 9th of June 1988, aged 70, though his body sadly was not discovered until the 14th of June 1988. Colin Handon is alive and well, aged 81. Norman Chapman died of cancer in 1995, the date unknown. Richie Galvin died in Liverpool in 2001, aged 58. Bobby Graham died the 14th of September 2009, aged 69. Johnny Hutchinson died on 12th of April 2019, aged 78. Mona Best. Mona died of a heart attack on the 9th of October 1988. She must be remembered as the woman who gave the first big break to the Beatles. Pete Best is alive and well, aged 78. Pete was thought by many to be treated badly by the other group members. However, after years of wondering how life could have been in 1995, he received a call from Paul McCartney. Paul told him there was some money owed to him from royalties, from tracks on the anthology album which featured Pete on the drums. Although we do not know the exact amount, it was rumoured to be between £1 and £4 million. So a small consolation for the fifth and unsung Beatle. So what happened to the Casbah Coffee Club? Even though the membership list has spiraled to over 1,000, Mona closed the club on the 24th of June 1962, with the Beatles as the last group to perform. It has now been opened as a tourist attraction in Liverpool, along with Lennon and McCartney's previous homes. The club is 3.5 miles from the Liverpool city centre. It's best to leave the last word to Paul McCartney. McCartney was quoted as saying, "I think it's a good idea to let people know about the Casbah. They know about the cavern, they know about most of these things, but the Casbah was the place where it all started. We helped paint it and stuff. We looked upon it as our own personal club." Well, that was the story of the beginning of the Beatles. Please subscribe and like this video, and thank you for watching.